Hello and welcome to Film Slam Stream's post-film conversation for Flashpoint, Protests, Policing, and the Press. My name is Eric Siler, and I'm an instructor of film, media arts, and communications, as well as moderator for this conversation. We're very pleased to be joined by the director and the executive producer of this film. The director of the film is Max Esposito. He's joining us from New York. And also in New York is Candace White. She's the executive producer of the film, and she's with the Knight Institute at Columbia University. Hello, Max and Candace, and welcome.
Hello, Eric. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, very interesting film. And I'll start with you, Max, and I'll just go back and forth between you and Candace. Um, Everyone's a journalist now, with their phone, and they think they're journalists, but they're not. So you had to actually tell a story in a way how people were, trained journalists, how people, are pocket journalists now. So why did you decide to get involved with this project? You having a background in film and working with the camera.
Yeah, so I studied journalism in college, particularly photojournalism. And so when Candace and the Knight Institute had reached out about this project, it definitely piqued an interest. And I think for me as a storyteller, if I can have an opportunity to use my storytelling abilities to, help preserve the rights of other storytellers, that's really important, and that feels like a great use of storytelling skills. So the passion of journalism had been instilled kind of early on in my career by fantastic journalism professors, and then this project seems like a perfect match to me of using those skills to further the role of journalists in the United States, and to hopefully, play a small role in the larger discussion about the rights of journalists as they cover protests and as protests continue to be prevalent in the US.
Absolutely. And Candace, this film came out of a report that the Knight Institute did. Why did you not just stop at the report? Why did you want to actually have a film made about this particular topic?
I think what really made it evident that the report had potential to be, developed and made into another form of storytelling was the strong personal stories. I mean, the idea, I think, when you think of journalists, you often think about individuals on camera in a studio, maybe reading copy to camera, like an anchor position. But it's a lot more than that. And while we understand reporters and beat reporters, what they do, I think oftentimes you don't really comprehend some of the harrowing positions they're put in when they are in the field and are on the front lines, so to speak, capturing especially protests that are growing exponentially in the United States. And so we thought immediately they had such amazing storytelling possibilities, these individuals who experience these sort of some violent experiences at the hand of police. It just has a really compelling visual component. And we knew that there was a ton of, video out there, B-roll that we can use, even if we, sadly or fortunately weren't able to, participate in a protest to capture it firsthand. There was a lot of material out there that could then give this report a second and third life. And the Institute itself wanted to have an opportunity to tell stories through film. We have a podcast, we have visiting scholars that come on a regular basis, and I have a background as a journalist and a filmmaker, and it seemed like an easy kind of collaboration and an easy partnership with Joel Simon, the report's author. And then I went about trying to find, the perfect director for this. And at my first conversation with Max, I knew he would be a really good partner to bring in to work on this. I think he had a really visual eye, and he knew how to use the material we can find online to really, bring the story to life.
In your report, Candace, is there a key reason you found more increase in, law enforcement acting negatively towards journalists, or is that still yet to be determined?
I think that what Joel found, because it wasn't my personal report, but Joel Simon, the journalist, found is that this, this sort of interaction between police and journalists has a long history, and the film speaks about this. That it's not just something that's happening in the recent experiences of protests around police brutality, the well-known ones, sadly, with George Floyd, et cetera. This is a kind of a relationship that's been happening since way, 50, 60 years ago, beginning in the civil rights movement. Why it may be a little bit more prominent in the public's eye is because of the mode of capturing actually one of the tools of journalists, which is a cell phone, and the ease and the speed in which information comes from the field to the public. And that's as easily as hitting send, right? So if you are a journalist who's using their cell phone or their mobile devices to capture and do some storytelling in the field, you can share that through social media platforms. You can share that online instantly. So I think the public and the general public, let's say, might feel it's sort of an increase. And there might be an increase in engagement because there's a lot more things to be unhappy about potentially with the way society is evolving right now. But what you're seeing is the instantaneous sort of receipt of that information. It no longer has to go through sort of these editorial processes. It doesn't always have to, and the sort of the barrier of entry into the field of journalism has lowered. So I think it's a combination of, it's a historical relationship. It's a relationship that's being explained and explored quite swiftly through the use of digital devices. And it's also a bit about, what's happening is society, the relationships between the police and the press. I think police just don't want to be videotaped, and they, because everyone has a mobile device, a lot of people, when they see wrong occurring, will pull out a cell phone and capture that. And that is not necessarily something many police officers or law enforcement departments like.
Right.
And if I can just
Over to
add
you.
to that,
Go ahead, Max. Go ahead.
one resource that was incredibly helpful for the report was the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker, which I believe was established in 2017. So that is a database that shows, a collection of incidents that have been reported that are infringements against the rights of journalists. I think it even extends beyond just incidents that involve police. So any sort of infraction against a journalist's right to record, for example, are collected in this database. So thinking about your question of, can we objectively say that there's been an increase in incidents of police targeting or violence against journalists? We're now collecting the data as of 2017 to be able to see if those trends exist. So I think that is going to be a powerful tool to really look at the data, and be able to really go to law enforcement agencies and say, hey, listen, this is not getting better. It's actually getting worse. And what are you going to do about it? Or what can we do about it?
So just sticking with you, Max, you obviously had to go through the report and also try to mimic the report in some way, and you can't get everything into the report. Can you tell us some things that you put in the film that's what's in the report that didn't make it to the film?
Yeah, so there's this really, if you can really get into the nuance of who is a journalist and who is not a journalist, right? And I think that was a core question of the report, but also the film. And there's a lot of really interesting legal points and legislation that you can examine that isn't federal, that goes state by state. And certain states have certain legislation that exempts journalists from certain curfew orders or from um, certain evacuation orders or things like that. And that's when it gets really interesting, because you could have the, say, New York City Police Department instill a curfew, right? Or the governor's office enact a curfew. And within that executive order, it could say journalists are exempt. And some states have a mandate that says journalists are exempt from those sort of executive orders. Some states do not have that. So you can start to look at which states have those mandates. For example, in California, it's called SB 98. And what that is a protection for journalists to remain in, a crime scene, to remain on the streets when there's a protest. And it prevents these kind of information black holes from existing, because journalists are always out. They can see what the police are doing when everyone has been told to go home. They can hold the police accountable. And that is a really interesting kind of legal protection for journalists that isn't uniform across the board, across every state in the country. But it's something that we didn't really have the time to dig into in the edit. We interviewed a lot of people discussing it, which was fascinating. But to try and keep the film to around 20 minutes, it's something that didn't make the cut, but I think from a legal standpoint is really fascinating, because it really gets to the question of who can stay and who cannot stay, and what is the role of that person in really keeping the police accountable for their actions when everyone else, quote unquote, has been told to go home.
Exactly.
And that's just one example. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to
Thank
throw in an example,
you.
if you don't mind, Eric, of elements of the film that were not in the report. And that's really in characters. Some of the individuals that were main characters in the film were found by Max, and I'd love for him to talk a bit about that. The report, at first we thought, would kind of mirror the film, or the film rather would mirror the report. But as we dug deeper, we found it could have its own legs and have its own life and tell its own story and be together but separate from the report. And I'd love for you to tell them how you found Ashanti, for example, because there are really some really compelling individuals in the film that were not part of Joel's report. And that was just because Joel's report did its own research, and it was up to us to do our own as well, to give this film its own sort of existence.
Yeah. So, I think we tried to do our due diligence of reach out to people that were prominently featured in the report, and then also ask them, who else do you know, or who else are you working with that may be a strong candidate for us to talk to. So kind of continuing along with the legwork that Joel Simon had done in his report, and continue that to see who else is out there that we could talk to. And one person that we talked to was Ashanti Blaze Hopkins, who's currently the, I believe, president of the Society for Professional Journalists. And she was one of many people that we interviewed that were not necessarily in the report. And we were kind of deciding, do we want to film these people for the film itself? And so we did a lot of pre-interviews, understanding, who had that kind of on-screen charisma, who had really interesting points to make. And Ashanti was obviously fantastic, as you can see in the film. And so we wanted to hear her opinion, because not only is she involved in this national organization of professional journalists, but she's also been a reporter herself. She is now also a professor of journalism at, I believe, the Santa Monica College in California. And she's also was working with this group of journalism advocates and journalists to reform, or to create a roadmap of policy to share with the LAPD, so that the LAPD would hopefully reform some of their policies after the 2020 protests. And so Ashanti just had this breadth of experience and knowledge. And, you know, she was someone that we were happy to have in the film. And I think, as Candace said, was kind of this, you know, really passionate voice that's not featured in the report, but lends so much energy and passion to the film itself.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you continue to push the envelope and dig more and more information could come out. And if there wasn't a deadline or an end time, there's more information out there. I'm sure you could have found.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So Candace, when you wanted this film made, you obviously had a certain goal in mind to mimic the report in some respects, but this film has done more than that. Can you explain briefly what this film has done beyond just illustrating the report, the responses to maybe law enforcement, other journalists, the general public? What has this film done?
Well, you know, I think what the film is if not done, will do is it sort of sheds a light, a visualized light, let's say, like it's a visualization of what the report says. It's sort of like a one-dimensional kind of, you know, narrative in the report. But I think the film brings that and other narratives to life. And to me, that's what's really cool about filmmaking, is that it's one thing to read about a person's individual story or narrative, and it's something else to see it and to experience it sitting in a theater with people who are sort of equally engaged and interested in hearing where this goes. So my hope is that this film helps, especially since it's positioned, like I said, in the LA Times short docs, with the reform that Ashanti and others in that state are, and particularly in the Los Angeles area, actively working towards. I hope this is like an additional resource. It's a tool. It's a sort of testimonial of what's at stake. And as you know, as the report and the film say, this won't end. These type of ugly interactions won't end until reform is done. And in order to have reform, law enforcement needs to understand there's a problem. And I think that's what that film does. It explains, it visually tells, and it shows in a very concise, neat package that this story not only is happening in present day, it has historical references, and the history behind that makes it so that unless reform occurs, it will happen again. So I think that's, to me, what the film's biggest contribution to this larger discussion is.
And wrap question for the both of you. Both of you have backgrounds in journalism. And I like how the two of you decided to show a couple of prominent events in history. Bloody Sunday back in March of 1965, how that impacted society, and also Darnella Frazier. If Darnella wasn't there, what would have happened, and showing how she captured the George Floyd murder. How do you feel about, you know, ordinary citizens being labeled as journalists with your backgrounds in journalism? Or do you see a distinction between the two? I know one is trained, but another one is not, but we can get the same outcome. What are your feelings about that?
Well, I think we come down pretty solidly on what the film and the report clearly outlines. We support it not only individually. I support it individually, personally, and as an institution, as a institution's sort of mandated mission is around that kind of press freedom. Is that if you're doing the work of a journalist and you are part of that storytelling, you know, frontline, you know, the front line of storytellers, or if you're just there to capture for your own personal purposes. But if you're that's your role, then I as a journalist who've been trained, and I came about journalism sort of like finding my own way, right? I got a master's in journalism way after my career was, you know, pretty well firmly established. And I was a freelancer for many years, and I did not carry a journalist badge. And I know sometimes I worked with well-known institutions and organizations, PBS and some of the cable networks, but sometimes I did not. And I feel, you know, those are my people, you know, so I do not see any difference between someone like Darnella Frazier, who's there at a sadly opportune moment to tell the story that otherwise I am 100% sure would not have been told. I do not see myself different from that individuals or other individuals who are at protests capturing this information using their cell phones, their iPads, whatever they have at hand. I had a crew with me. I had a sound man and a cameraman with me when I worked as a journalist. There's no difference. So that is, you know, and I understand that that might be as the evolution of who is a journalist is playing out, that law enforcement may find themselves confused, at odds, you know, have a personal opinion about whether someone should come up to them with a camera and capture them as they're arresting or interrogating. But the First Amendment is there for a reason, and they have a job to do, and those who are there to capture and, you know, hold them to account, they have a job to do. And if you can sort of see it from that perspective and not you have your personal feelings about, you know, or your pride or your whatever come into play, I think there's an easy solution. Does it require work? Does it require work from both sort of sides of this? To a degree, but I think overwhelmingly what we see, what the report shows and what the film shows, is that the aggression is one-sided, and that it needs to, and that sort of reality needs to click with law enforcement. And so, yeah, I think they're part of the tribe of storytellers, and I welcome them.
Yeah, I think Candace, you know, said that really well, and it's worth mentioning that Darnella Frazier was, I believe, awarded an honorary Pulitzer Prize for recording George Floyd's death and murder. And I think, you know, we have these tools, and those tools are more accessible and more prevalent, and those tools give anyone the ability to capture what's happening or in the world around them, and if there's an injustice and someone has the ability to do that and to record it, and that recording can play a role in bringing justice for that situation, or can help the public learn about what happened in a given situation. You know, those are all elements of the role of news gathering, right? And so the film speaks to this idea of the act of journalism. Are there situations where maybe someone with a camera needs more quote unquote credentials to gain access to certain environments or certain areas? Potentially, you know, and I think those are case by case bases, and you know, there's some systems in place that address that, and there's some systems that need reworking and or creation to address that. But I think to Candace's point, like, if we can have these tools to hold particularly the police accountable, because seemingly time and time again they will not hold themselves accountable, then we should be able to use those tools, and we should have this right to record, and citizens should be protected to do that, and to capture whenever they see something that is happening that requires a level of accountability.
So I need to wrap this up. One more question I just want to ask is the you know, a lot of law enforcement wear body cameras, and that's different from, you know, a journalist or someone reporting what's going on. What is your response to that, saying that, you know, the law enforcement may feel like, why do we need someone recording us? We have body cameras, so get out of here. I don't want you to misrepresent us. We have our own representation. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. You know, I heard Mickey Ostreicher, who's featured in the film, who's a former journalist and also works with law enforcement, on reform and how to work with journalists. He had this analogy, which may or may not hold up, but I think it works. And he kind of said it's like professional sports, right? And you want to watch a replay, and you want all the angles of that replay to figure out exactly, where the ball was, and was, a player out of bounds, right? Where was their foot? And you need all the angles to tell the whole story and to literally see the whole picture. And so, I would say the more, this could potentially be a slippery slope, but like, at least in public spaces, the more coverage of a given incident that there are, the more opportunities that, the courts have to make a fair ruling on what happened. And I think if you limit the cameras to just the POV of a police body camera, you're closing off a lot of that story. And so I think, the public should still have the ability to film in addition to having body cameras.
Do you have
Yeah.
anything to add
No,
to that,
I
Candace?
absolutely agree. Yeah. And I think the analogy I would think of is, as a journalist, you need 3 sources before, on average, a story goes to air, or before a story goes to print. So if, say a member of law enforcement is okay with that sort of, fact checking and process in order to make sure the story is accurate, this is very similar. This is literally, to me, the same thing. The more information you know, the more informed the public is, and the more we either, can exonerate in many, in some instances, potentially a member of law enforcement if they're being accused of wrongdoing. I think they would prefer to have more eyes on what's occurring so they can feel comfortable that their point of view is being told accurately. And if you have an issue with a camera, then it makes me wonder why. And so to me, I think I equate it to journalists need to have sources, and they need to have multiple sources before they can confirm a story or a point of view or telling is accurate. And I think this is the same thing.
Oh, great. And I just want to point out that, you just brought to light a situation that's happening between law enforcement and journalists. It's not prevalent, but it happens far too often than it needs to happen. So I just want to unsay that, because law enforcement generally does a good job, but so no, they need to be held accountable, just like anyone in the
Oh, absolutely.
public
Yeah.
face. And so I appreciate the time that the both of you shared with us. Briefly, Max and Candace, what can we expect next from you? Not regarding this, but regarding maybe this project or something else. Real quick, I'll take on Max, you can go first.
Sure. I'm regarding this project, I'm trying to get a screening of Flashpoint at my alma mater, Boston University, that has a great journalism program. So continuing with bringing this into the educational environment and for aspiring journalists, using this as one small lesson in many lessons about the roles of journalists and their rights and how to protect those rights. And then I have a few other unrelated documentary projects in the works down the line as well.
Great. And what about you,
And
Candace?
as far as the Institute, we too are continuing to submit it. Well, we haven't submitted it in a while, but it's in play at a few other festivals, a few other award sort of categories that might wrap up in January of next year, January 2025. So hopefully, fingers crossed, Flashpoint will still be in the festival space for a while. And the Institute, I am overseeing the 3rd season of our podcast, Views on First, which is scheduled to drop on November 13th. This season is titled Speech on the Border, and it's about sort of First Amendment rights for those who are crossing the border, non-citizens. It's It's very detailed. I will share out a link maybe with Gabrielle when it becomes live. So we are continuing in our storytelling vein, using as many platforms as we have available. We are eager to explore another feature film. Max and I have been chatting about that. We, at the moment, because there are a couple of things that took its place, that's sort of back burner just for a little bit until we get our podcast up and out. But yeah, we're going to continue telling stories that deal with First Amendment and free speech and the right to access and so forth. So yeah, hopefully he and I can work together again soon.
Let's hope so. And we will look forward to seeing whatever the two of you come up with. Max Esposito and Candace White. Max, Director of Flashpoint, Policing Protests and the Press, Policing, and Candace White, Executive Director of Flashpoint, Protest, Policing, and the Press. Thank you both very much for joining us, and I wish you both all the best.
Thank you so much,
Eric.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
And thank you to our audience for joining us for this important and invigorating conversation. For more information about our upcoming events, please visit us at clevelandfilm.org. I'm Eric Siler. Thank you.